Program is under. Is here. Dan has also been to Ghana, so there's a strong Ghana connection here at Boston University. And I see Yasim and Andrea both at the city planning program. I myself, I'm an adjunct professor in the program, been there for 14 years, which is why, you know, they asked me to have the opportunity to introduce the ambassador. Now, the ambassador has indirect link to Boston University. And the reason why I say that is that my father, late father, was a professor at the medical school for 35 years. And so in July, when I had a chance to sit down with him, and I mentioned my name, he looked at me and said, "No, you're not Dr. Kyei-Aboagye's son." And I said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Oh, we were rascals." And I said, "Okay." And so I'm like, okay, now I gotta be careful what I say. You know. In England and Wales, you know, Great Britain, as well as in Ghana. This is his second post as an ambassador. He was Ghana's former ambassador to Japan, Singapore, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and New Zealand. And he presented his credentials here on July 21st to your current president, Donald J. Trump, on July 21st. This is his first activity in the United States, and he has chosen to come to Boston. You know, he's had a rigorous meeting yesterday and today, and as a young man that he is, you know, he's so got energy. So, Dr. Adjei-Barwuah, thank you for giving us the time and coming to Boston University, the home of your friends, and the home of Boston University. To myself, I've been nurtured here, so I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I think for what you said, I have to review the amount of money I gave you to say nice things about me, because you said the nicer things about me today. I'm very happy to be here, and I think if they had told me that I was going to face a room full of sharpshooters, I might probably have found a reason not to come. The last time I faced academicians like you was probably during my last year at the University of Ghana, which I wouldn't want to mention because most of you were not born at the time. But that is it. My understanding is that I would want to make some comments about sustainable development with a reference to Kumasi. If I talk about Kumasi, I can't be very passionate because I was born there, I grew up there, I went to school there until I went to the University of Ghana. So I do have a certain kind of serious attachment to the city. At the moment, it is a city of about 1.7 million. And when you are talking about the sustainable development of a city, it is a bit of a difficult subject because considering that you are involved in cities, the city probably is like the human body. It grows every day. It changes every day because of either territorial development, or in terms of the makeup of the population, or in terms of the provision of facilities to sustain the city. So both physically and maybe in some ways metaphysically, the city changes every day. So it makes the definition of the word sustainable a little more difficult, where by sustainability you are talking about the possibility of, as it were, guiding and guarding the city to develop to the betterment of everybody else. And one has to admit that in our kind of environment, a certain conscious and precise planning of cities have always been very difficult, either because of the land ownership system, or because of the professionalism with which people handle the city, or because of the vagaries of our economic system, which sometimes make it a bit of a strangulation exercise for living organisms like the city. And Kumasi happens to be one of such cities. The old Arab traders who came down to the West African area to purchase gold and other things were quoted to have said that Ki napa zete o Kumasi nete paso paradis. If you have not been to Kumasi, you haven't been to paradise. Because Kumasi was a verdant city. It has always been called the Garden City of West Africa. Because everywhere that you turned in the Kumasi that I knew as a boy, it was either trees or flowers or well-tended lawns. And in every home, and we used to have the kind of architecture that people have grown to call the Kumasi passenger house, usually squarish, occupied by multiple unrelated families. And most of the time, the taxation system in the country targeted 2 windows to constitute a room. So the taxes were based according to the number of rooms you had in the house. So for every room, there was always a lawn outside. The lawn preceded the sidewalk before the street. And it was your duty to make sure that that little lawn was always kept and properly manicured. It was also your duty that every 4 years you painted your roof, because people used to harvest rainwater. And therefore, at least every 4 years, the assumption is that you ought to recognize that there is some kind of sedimentation of dust on top of the roof, so you have to clean it. And then, of course, every 2 years, you have to paint the outside of the house, because the city ought to have looked good, clean, well-tended, and to a certain extent, well-loved. And considering that Kumasi was a traditional city, and it is still traditional in the context of the fact that that is the seat of the Ashanti nation, Kumasi always had to look good. And because of its centrality in terms of the general area of Ghana, Kumasi was always a very vibrant commercial center. So traders from wherever used to come there, they still do come, either for retail purposes or for wholesale purposes or for the consumption of all the kinds of services that the average urban area would provide. Has a number of secondary schools, has the best secondary school in Ghana. That's the one I attended with his father. And it's true that we were very bad boys. Yeah. And we also have a couple of universities, the most famous being the University of Science and Technology. We have this wonderful museum, which probably at the moment, if I ought to be honest about it, is not as wonderful as what it used to be. But the big thing about Kumasi is that trying to keep it as an urban area has become difficult, partly because of a certain kind of uncontrolled expansion, partly because of the fact that generally the alignment of cities with regard to the relationship between manufacturing, between commercial activity, between residential use, and other kinds of uses don't seem to be soft. So where we are looking at the sustainability of Kumasi as a city, we probably will have to be looking at a situation where a government or a city council is going to be tougher, meaner, because we have to reshape the city. We have to physically transform the city for it to be the kind of city that most people would want to see. Kumasi was originally built on a series of ridges. And therefore, drainage was so good that Kumasi never knew anything that was called flooding. Kumasi was the kind of place where if it rained, you probably will see the rain coming down a city slope. As soon as it gets down to the valley, it disappears because it goes into a main gutter which is covered, and that goes into the Subi River, which runs in the middle of the city. At the moment, you don't see the Subi River in the city because that has also been canalized. But then, its flow has been compromised by the fact that other people discharge, especially vegetative waste, into the channel, and therefore you lose the kind of the end of the covered area to see the river actually pushing out. And when we were kids, we used to do what we call horse racing in the little gutters that went into the big gutter. And that one is only that we made canoe-shaped objects with calabash. We put it in the river. This was some kind of gambling. We're training ourselves to be gamblers. And whoever's piece gets to the finish line, wins. So if you are good at it, by the end of the day, maybe you could get a shilling or something, which is collection from those people who lost. So, and Kumasi was very orderly. We did have these sanitary inspectors who showed up. And they had this ladder with a very tall tail. They dip it in the water that you have harvested. And if anybody saw a little wiggle in the water, they immediately issued a summons. You go and pay the fine, or you can be sure that within 2 days you'll be in front of a magistrate and you may pay a little more than that. We have lost that kind of discipline. And that obviously impacts on the health of the city. If the health of the city is compromised, obviously all other economic, social activities get compromised. And then with the influx of people at the rate where the city itself cannot cope, either by way of housing or by way of other kinds of social services, or even by way of just the ability to handle day-to-day health facilities, has made the quality of living in the city a bit more, if I have to be diplomatic about it, a bit more sort of reduced, as opposed to saying that, well, you don't even want to talk about it. So we do have a city that, as it were, used to be the exemplar of urban living, if not in Ghana, or if not in West Africa, at least in Ghana. We did have a city that actually did run, because the Kumasi I knew as a boy was where you stand at a bus stop. There is a timetable, and if it says the bus will come at 7 o'clock, you can bet your last dollar that the bus will be there 2 minutes to 7 or 2 minutes after 7. If the bus broke down these days, either the buses don't come or they don't exist at all. Yes, there is still a certain kind of movement, but urban transportation is one of the difficulties that Kumasi has, like most of the metropolitan areas in Ghana. So the resuscitation of the kind of bringing the city into some kind of renewable or some kind of sustainable form is obviously going to take very drastic measures. The question then is sustainability such that it will have to, as it will, attack individual freedoms? Because the land tenure system is such that somebody might own a piece, and somehow the mentality is that this is my piece, all that I want to do is to put some kind of shop on it. It might not tally with the city's own general development insofar as making it a sustainable entity is concerned. But then, if the city laws are not rigidly applied, before you know it, I've already built. Then the question is there some kind of a justification to rip it down and tell me that this area had been earmarked for a school as opposed to a shop? Or you would have to let it stay because this is the press. Now, unless we do put together a new, urban system whereby ownership can be, as it were, purchased from people, or whereby people are told that on this plot of yours, yes, it's yours, but if you are not going to develop some kind of a medical facility on it, then of course you can't put it to some other use. Insofar as the utilization of an individual property is concerned, then maybe the city might end up, in litigation in the courts. And if the city is in some kind of litigation with you, you know that you probably are going to be the loser in the end, because the city can afford to go to court and always ask for some kind of postponement. But then in the meantime, the urban environment is compromised. You cannot use, or you cannot, as it were, hold a piece of territory within the urban area for a certain period of time, because it also compromises the other developments that will be done, in the city. Unfortunately, human development has made it possible for all of us to be controlled by the motor car and therefore by the street. And therefore, even in older towns like Kumasi, if you want to apply the classical theories of urban development, you are going to run into situations where you may either have to cordon off certain areas and call them the old cities and try to make them livable and usable and aesthetically presentable, or you are going to have to tell people that, sorry, cars are going to run here, and therefore you have to move. Now the movement then calls into the development of the suburban areas. And in countries where it isn't going to be that easy for people to transpose their living environments outside of the center, because transportation is not that great, you are obviously then, and then also the value of the property at the time may well not be enough to ask you to provide yourself a comparable accommodation on the outskirts of town. So you end up economically either compromising or crippling a certain proportion of the city. When that happens, the city's tax base goes down, the makeup of the population goes down, and those of you who are more into the location of economic activity, especially retailing, if that happens, then of course there will be a certain kind of fast entry and exit of retail units within that particular urban area. And then of course, in a city where, and then in a country where the greater proportion of the population is under the age of 18, these are people who don't even have the economic muscle to make alternative arrangements with regard to accommodation. And with that comes the provision of schools, the provision of health facilities, the provision of other social amenities, and then of course, a certain kind of attempt to reshape the locational aspects of economic activity also become very difficult. What one may end up with is a certain blob of decaying or decayed areas, usually called slums. And I believe that even without that kind of movement, that will cause people to bunch up in a smaller area at greater densities per measurement per square meter or what have you. You are also going to have a situation where you have to accept that as long as there are slums, then you have to recognize that the slums are also coming out of the fact that there are slum incomes. And where the economies are not vibrant enough, where the economy is not expanding enough, then of course we are always going to have slum incomes, and therefore the slum areas are going to be very solidified, they are going to be well entrenched. And if it came down to serious urban renewal, the cost of effecting that renewal may probably will be in excess of whatever it is that we are going to replace the slum areas with. So cities like Kumasi at the moment are in a dilemma. And then also, we do have Kumasi in particular being a traditional city. Traditional rulers do have a lot of impact on what happens. If a certain chief who traditionally owns this parcel says, in my neighborhood, you can't have this, you may well have to go and seek legislation that can override that kind of decision or attitude in defense of what we might call the interest of the general population. So the kinds of theories of urban development that would apply in Boston might probably not easily apply in Kumasi. Twice since I've been here, somebody has mentioned the fact that a certain highway was moved, put underground, so that there would be, as it were, a smooth transition between the city and the seafront. Well, I can see that the outcome is obviously beneficial. And I don't know what it took in terms of time, in terms of effort, in terms of money, to make that kind of change possible. In our circumstances, it might be difficult. But I guess maybe this is one of those areas where I do believe that there is something to be said for leadership, where at some point, some leader, in good conscience, and with a certain kind of a seriously considered plan on the ground, can tell everybody, well, if you would excuse it, to hell with it. You've got to move. If you don't want to move, we'll move you. But that is not one of the easiest things to do in the kinds of communities that we live in the kinds of legal systems that we operate, in the kinds of the mentality of the population that we are dealing with. So, all considered, yes, sustainable development of the cities, and especially of Kumasi, is a feasible proposition. But the feasibility is going to be a function of first funding, and therefore, those of you here who have access to people who are in a position to take a significant interest in city development and would want to help Kumasi can come in. I mean, we can very easily do some 40 million to transform Kumasi. But then also, we would have to go through a certain kind of serious, education to get certain people to understand that in the final analysis, certain changes would benefit all of us. And sometimes too, and especially those who have commercial interest, even where they recognize that what they are asking for is not particularly acceptable, they still press on for it, simply because they count the dollars first before they count the impact of whatever that they are going to do next. And I know that in Kumasi, for instance, there are certain kinds of developments or proposed developments which were any case by anybody, whether the person is in psychology or sociology or whatever of the ology, will recognize that that is not a very suitable place for that kind of development. But before you know it, the development is there. It generates a lot of headache by way of the volume of traffic generation. It compromises everything else that can be done in the neighborhood. But then, as long as it is physically in place, you have to cope with it. So we are in a situation where we either have to decide that we will change the orientation of the city and therefore move certain critical activity out of where they are now, or we try to get other people to change their location, which obviously would call for a certain kind of headache in terms of the economics of it, or would cause a certain kind of discomfiture because of the emotional matters that come with that kind of relocation. I did my PhD research in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was looking at the socioeconomic areas within the ghetto. And you could find that even the size of the street determines the location of economic activity. The size of the street determines the rate of entry and exit of economic activity. And we are equally sensitive to that. So Kumasi, for instance, has the largest single central market in West Africa. So it is an economic hub. The kinds of monies that change hands in that market is more than twice what banks take in a day. And because of that, the pulse of the city is in the market. Now, if because of transportation difficulties and maybe other considerations, anybody said we should remove the market, well, you are touching the heartbeat of the city. And in Ashanti, you are touching the heartbeat of the region. And by extension, you are touching the economic heartbeat of the country. So we are in some kind of a quandary so far as urban development is concerned. But that then is the challenge. We need to sort of sit down, put pen and pencil, and paper down, and then try to find out whether there is a different design that we can do to bring back the city. If not as it used to be, it should be as we would want it to be over the next half century. The issue then is the sort of weight that the new designers will have in the context of the competing the requirements of both the traditional sector and the modern sector. Tokyo, for instance, was developing this shopping housing complex called Roppongi Hills. And I understand that to get that piece of real estate to develop Roppongi Hills, the government and the commercial interests had to negotiate with the original residents of that area for a period of 21 years. So it means that if you want to make any significantly dramatic change within that kind of urban environment, and ours is close to that because the Japanese are a bit traditionally like a lot of Ghanaians. And strangely enough, there are Japanese names that are also Ghanaian names. So I always suspected either Japanese ancestry was in Ghana or Ghanaian ancestry was in Japan. Yeah. It took that kind of time to get hold of that piece to develop Roppongi Hills. But the thing is, you see the structure, you see the businesses in there, you see the residential properties in there, and something tells you that it was a wise decision that was taken. But 21 years of taking a wise decision is what countries like us cannot afford, simply because of the rate of change in the world, either in terms of technology or what have you. And then also, whilst we would want to change, we have to build into that the fact that technology has so changed that maybe by the time we finish, whatever we've done is already in obsolescence. For instance, we don't manufacture motor vehicles. So we take what other people manufacture. At the moment, the energy sector is developing to a point where motor manufacturers are looking at the alternatives to petrol and diesel and what have you. If they are successful, either we scrap all that we've got and recognize that we can't afford what is new, or we stay with the obsolescent technology, which, because there is a recession in their manufacture, is going to mean that it's going to be more expensive by unit. Then of course we are going to end up with obsolescent machinery, more expensive, and therefore our whole system becomes quite uncompetitive. So we are in a certain kind of dilemma, and I think we cannot be very successful sustaining our economies if we even have that kind of difficulty in sustaining our urban areas where, as it were, the nerve centers of our economies are going to be, and they have always been. So we would want to go back to getting the Arabs to say that if you haven't been to Kumasi, you haven't been to paradise. And we've started doing a few things. But there is going to be a certain massive injection of innovation, capital, and, as it were, goodwill to bring Kumasi up to where somebody will take a look and tell us, yes, this is a town. Yes, this is the prototype of the kind of environment that one ought to be able to create and sustain a certain kind of meaningful existence. We love Kumasi. I know most people love Kumasi. They can't get away from it. Kumasi is where, on the average Friday, there is a flight of people from Accra to go to Kumasi. Well, there is a lot of peace. There is a lot of romance in the town. There is a lot of well-being in the city. They come back to Accra to come and hustle for whatever that there is. But for a city that has the potential to be both a big manufacturing city and a place for leisure, because a lot of Ghana's tourism is either in Kumasi or is around Kumasi. So to a certain extent, our own search for economic well-being is going to be seriously tied to what happens in Kumasi. And I think maybe what I'm trying to ask you to contribute by being here today is actually putting on your thinking caps, scanning where you think we could have some kind of support, and that includes Boston University. Mm-hmm. And also to look at the kinds of urban innovation that can be done to make sure that we resuscitate the city and at the same time generate a new phase of urban development. I know that in the 60s, when cities like Chicago were running away and such, it was John Gottman who proposed the theory of the megalopolis. And that one was supposed to mean that whenever the city is approaching other cities, you have to find a way of linking the umbilical cords in order to make the whole metropolitan area operational. And I think maybe for our purposes, we are in that kind of situation. But we are not in a good position in terms of the ability to develop the system individually or as a country by ourselves. That is why we want to look at elsewhere for a certain kind of support. Not necessarily by way of or what have you, but by way of a certain kind of injection of new ideas, new considerations in urban design and whatnot. Because that probably is what your particular unit is geared for. Because we want to tap on your expertise. We want to tap on your thinking. And then, of course, even if it came down to financing, I'm quite sure there are quite a few people in Boston University, and especially in this unit, who would know a few people who are in love with cities and would therefore want to consider putting in a couple of dollars in the development of a city that has always had a reputation for being where the action is. A city where, obviously, we do have the workforce for manufacturing, we do have the workforce for other kinds of economic activity. And therefore, if you put your penny in, I can promise you that you certainly aren't going to lose it, but you will certainly make a couple of dollars off it. Now that, for me, is the attraction of Kumasi. And I hope that maybe by the comments and the questions you ask, I will be able to ask it to hit the areas I haven't hit, which you might be interested in. Can I thank you for the gift of your attention?
And now, please, obviously, the ambassador has touched on for him. It's an opportunity. He's chosen to come here as his first stop. Catherine, turn it to you.
Sure. Are there questions? I have a question. I'm going to pose the first question if you want me to. So, sure. I'll start with the audience. So I'm curious to get an understanding of the responsibilities that fall to the national government and the responsibilities that fall to the local government. Of course, our focus at the Initiative on Cities is urban governance. We do a lot of research with mayors, and obviously mayors' powers and authority in the US differs, but it also differs in every country in the world. And even within the US, there's a wide variation. The mayor of Louisville, I don't know if Jerry Abramson was the mayor when you were there, but the mayor of Louisville has a tremendous amount of control over the city and the county. And I'm curious if you can give us a sense of what is the division of authority and powers in terms of direct service delivery. How much is the national government playing a role in the revitalization of the city, and how much control does the local authority have?
Well, the city will have a city council and a mayor. And then there are subdivisions within the city that will have sub-metropolitan councils, and they also have sub-metropolitan chief executives. With that kind of division, you would believe that if they are working, as it were, with a certain kind of central direction coming from the city hall, then most areas, would be decently covered. They are covered to the extent that, considering that the main, sustenance of the city, as embodied in the city council, comes from central government. Considering that the mayor is usually nominated by the government but approved by city councils. And the fact is, if the government nominates somebody, you don't want to do, So in some sense, where the financing of the city is not basically coming from taxation within the city, it makes a certain kind of independence of decision making slightly, not very complete. But even if one has to assume that, of course, the central government is also up to some good, and therefore the central government will, accede to decisions taken by the city council, it still does not give the council a certain kind of, pointed authority to do certain kinds of, activities. And besides, when I was a boy, the mayor was elected. The city councillors were elected. So the mayor always knew that in 2 years' time, he might not be a mayor, And therefore, to try and stay as a mayor, I believe that was why the bus system worked, that was why sanitation worked, that was why, everything sort of worked. Yeah. So that makes it a bit difficult. But I also believe that if a mayor with, a good plan, backed by, the citizens of the city, is prepared to stand his ground. There might be a tough central government, but at the same time, there might be a tougher local government. And I think a lot can be done. It's not a matter of somebody has to opposing somebody. I think the mayor has a good plan. It will be impossible for the central government to say that we are not interested in good plans. So I think it all boils down to, one, the planning, two, the ability to, as it were, bring people, on board, especially the citizens themselves. And then, of course, a lot could be done.
Well, we're working with a group in the United Kingdom right now. They have new directly elected mayors in a number of municipalities where there hadn't been directly elected mayors previously.
Right.
So they're going through their own. So perhaps, is that ever in the future? Do you think the government would return to a system of directly elected versus appointed mayors?
It has been hinted.
Yeah.
And in fact, people are expecting that next year we will start electing mayors.
Yeah.
I suspect that in terms of political timing, it might not be that feasible, but maybe it will roll into the next election, which is 2020. But if the government is prepared to go ahead with the elected mayors, it will be very helpful. Yeah, it will give a lot of leverage to local officers and the population to do something about the city.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to open it up to questions, please.
So the initiative that you're looking for / marketing needs interaction. What buy-in have you that came in that was successful or that may not be successful?
What was the question? What buy-in you said?
Buy-in from whom?
For businesses, corporations. So if you would like corporations to come in,
Sure.
what buy-in, what market, what initiative, so what buy-in would they want to invest to have that circle go around?
Well, for instance, I'm quite sure that if there are people who are interested in the, as it were, in easing out transportation within the city. I for one, I'm in the market for some kind of transportation system, which is either some kind of elevated, railroad track because of the congestion within certain areas of the city, or a certain improvement in the mesh of streets in the city to make it a bit easier to circulate. And then, of course, we used to be the center of timber production. So we are still, in a position where people who are interested in investing in, factories and so that produce, timber products will be most welcome. And as I said, Kumasi is the hub of our tourist product. So we'll be looking for, hotels, we'll be looking for, lodges and that kind of thing. And besides, I believe that, any enterprise that has a certain kind of Ghanaian-based products, and especially if it has to do with, say, value-added venture to agricultural produce and whatnot, Kumasi is a place to be. And you probably might be employing just about 5 people, but those 5 people probably would affect the livelihoods of about 14 other people. So it makes the economy buoyant again. And also, I wish there was somebody in here who would be interested in getting involved in the development of a very good technical institution where we are producing lathe turners, where we are producing masons, where we are producing steel benders, that kind of thing. Because at the moment, part of the problem that we have, and I believe other countries have it, and even there was a comment somebody made yesterday, which even said that the Boston may happen, is the fact that the world has developed to a situation where if you don't have a BA or MSc or a PhD or something after your name, most people don't even talk to you when it comes to an employment. But then at the same time, if you want a good carpenter, it's difficult to find one. If you want, some kind of somebody who is a bit nifty with the production of certain metal parts, it becomes difficult. But this morning, I was telling somebody about the story of a person who invited some kind of a refrigeration person to come and fix a fridge. The guy comes in, within some 4 minutes, the fridge is working. He says $300. The what? For that kind of work, for that time? Then I'm not charging for the work I did and for the time. I'm charging for knowing what to do. So basically, it is the know-how that we need. So there is a lot of room for the kind of institution that will produce those kinds of people. I know that it may call for a certain kind of change in the remuneration schedule, whereby the person with some kind of a technical qualification and is able to be, even if it's a metal basher, may well earn a little more than somebody with a BA degree, maybe in ancient history or whatever discipline the person studied. It is the differential weights in the contribution to the economy at any one time that will determine the price for labor. So those are areas that, in case we came across somebody who is
people going to want to know the buy-in. Why am I investing in this?
Yeah.
So that's basically
I think
marketing
we are
initiatives.
open for any kind of meaningful addition to our socioeconomic situation.
First off, well, thank you for being here. And touching a little bit off the last question, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the foreign investors in Ghana and to what extent are foreign investors, what role are they playing in urban development in Ghana? Like, I know the Chinese government is making substantial investments in many countries in Africa, and I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to those partnerships.
At the risk of sounding negatively partisan, I think personally, for the kinds of things that are very critical for us at this point in time, those are not the areas that the Chinese are looking at. And the Americans that we have, and there are lots of American companies in Ghana, I think they traditionally have also been involved in the more comfortable areas of the economy, importing and getting Ghanaians to subscribe to the kinds of goods that are American, getting involved in, to a certain extent, IT and that kind of thing. So, as I said, we have a wide breadth of activities that we would want Americans in particular to consider. Because we've been in a very sweet relationship with America for 50 years. And I suppose I have a responsibility of developing the foundations for the next 50 years. We've had 60. So I would want the American companies to, as it were, borrow their involvement of it. Produce something. Produce things that are based on the near raw materials. And as far as investor safety is concerned, we probably have the best laws on the continent insofar as ensuring that people's profits are not attacked. We have a particularly law-abiding citizens, and I'm quite sure if you haven't visited Worcester, maybe you should visit Worcester, which has a population, the Ghanaian population of about 30,000. And I don't think you will get from the police records that on the average there are 3 people who get involved with the police negatively. So in a way, we come to the market with a very good reputation as being hardworking, law-abiding, and very quick to learn. And I think this is where the Americans ought to be looking at, because we are not asking for, as it were, some largesse. We are just asking for honest to goodness economic relationship where the investor wins and of course the country also wins.
Wonderful. On that, I will say, please join me in thanking the ambassador.